All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Decibel Geek podcast, the show that rocks and rolls, and we talk about rock and roll. We've been doing this for about 12 years now, and we've had Stevie as a guest before on the show, and he was awesome. And if you listen to the show, you guys all know this man's my rock and roll hero. I got the cheesehead with me to prove it. Oh, yeah, Stevie Rachelle's here with us. Chris Sinzak, this is amazing, man.
It is, and I'm going to focus on the Metal Sludge questions because I'm a giant fan of Metal Sludge since 1998, and I'm going to let you handle the hard questions, or the tough questions.
Oh, the
pun
tough
intended.
questions. Oh, okay, all right. So I guess to start it, go ahead, Steve.
I was just going to say, I never knew how to pronounce his last name. I just knew it was like a C and a Z and a Y, and I was guessing it was Polish or something.
You got that right.
I think it's hard enough to pronounce. Try to
Sinzak?
spell it. Yeah.
Sinzak?
Sinzak.
Okay.
So I told him he should change it so it's like a sack of sin. That's metal.
You're more creative than me, but and family from Milwaukee, which makes sense.
Well, and the thing is, at this point, when I meet somebody, you put their name in. There's a lot of Chris's in my phone.
I believe it.
So I have to put in, like, podcast guy, Nashville, geek, like, oh, that's the Decibel Geek guy, and then I'm
Geek.
trying to write your last name.
Yeah,
Well, Decibel Geek,
I know.
Kiss Geek,
Yeah,
maybe a little.
Yeah.
But Sinzak, now I know your name.
yeah. And if
After all
you
these
want to
years.
look me up on Facebook, just punch your keyboard, my name will show up.
There he is.
Yeah.
It's awesome, man. I've been a fan of Tuff since I was a young teenager. Man, when it was that time when Tuff was around, it was like Motley Crue and Poison and Kiss, and these were the bands that I loved. And then when Tuff came around, I was like, that's exactly what I love too. And so we bought that brand new album when it was brand new and loved it. And then everything changed. It's like all my friends that were with me last week talking about how awesome the new Motley Crue album is and this and that, they're like, oh, Motley Crue? I don't listen to Motley Crue anymore. I listen to Nirvana. I'm like, but last week we were just arguing, like, who's better, Eddie Van Halen or Ace Frehley? Like, oh, yeah, well, I just listen to Pearl Jam now. And I was like, you sons of bitches. You dirty posers. And they're like, you're the poser. Look at the bands you listen to. Like, no, you got it wrong. You guys are the posers. You guys loved this stuff last week, and now all of a sudden, everything's different. So then it was like, I don't care. I love Tuff. I'm going to keep finding these albums. So then when Fist first came out, I'd go to the Inner Sleeve Records in Wausau, Wisconsin, and be like, can you special order this for me? He's like, yeah, you're the only one that asked for it. I was like, great, bring it. Religious Fix. I was like, hey, got a new Tuff album coming out. Can you get it for me? And he'd get it for me. So it was like weird to live through the whole time change. But in 2001, I'm working at Z104 in central Wisconsin, and they bring me the CD of History of Tuff. And they go, hey, you like Tuff? I said, I love Tuff. Do you want to play the new Tuff song on the radio? And I was, what? Like, I never thought you would ever ask me that. You're like, yes, please, yes, what is it? And, I've said it before, I've said it a million times, that song changed everything. Like, when I played that song on the radio, people said, yeah, I do want to see Tommy Lee back spinning his sticks. Right. And I do want to shout it out loud for a band named Kiss, Right. And that song changed everything, where it was like we used to get picked on for a little while there for loving those bands, for sticking with them.
For 10 years.
For 10 years. Right. For 10 long years. Man, thank you for that. Do you feel the impact of that when that came out?
Well, yes. And what happened is Tuff had ended at the end of 1995.
Yeah.
So me and George were still doing it. Michael and Todd had jumped ship, so to speak. But at that point, anybody from the 80s, from Sunset Strip, blonde hair, you were drowning in grunge,
Yeah.
And it was just, we were not just tossed away by record labels and maybe fans, but even roadies would be selective. Like, I don't know if I want to go on tour with Tuff. We had, magazine press. I remember calling the Troubadour and wanting to book a show in the 90s. And at this point, the booker was a guy named Lance. And he's like, I don't know. And, I basically begged the guy to book us. He did. The show did great. We surpassed our guarantee and got a bonus. But when I called him 4 or 5 months later to book another show, he was once again very hesitant. So it wasn't, the change happened across the board, from producers, road crew, magazine press didn't want to cover us. Of course, radio didn't want to touch us. So that happened for many years, and by the end of 95, I said, George, maybe there's a black cloud over us. Maybe we should call it a day. So we did. We stopped doing Tuff, and then in 96, I did the side project, the Cheeseheads, did another record, 97, 98. I put out a solo record. I started this website in 1998, Metal Sludge. But around 2000, there was a little bit of a shift, and I saw it even with the local band called Metal Shop.
Yeah.
And this was before they were called Steel Panther, and they were just, there was a famous syndicated radio program in the 80s called Metal Shop, with Charlie Kendall.
Yeah.
And so they had this parody thing going on, and Metal Shop became super popular in Hollywood. They would play at the Viper Rooms on Monday night, and the Viper Room is not big, but everybody went, and they were doing Bon Jovi and Poison and Motley Crue and all those bands. Everybody had fun with it, and everybody that was there was having fun with it. If they would have tried that in 94 or 95, it just probably wouldn't have worked, because people would have just said no, no, no. So now at some point I decide I'm going to relaunch Tuff. And because it was the year 2000, everything was Y2K.
Right.
And I had the idea to call the band Tuff 2K.
Right.
Like Tuff 2000,
Yeah.
the new version. I asked Michael, Todd, and George if they were interested, if they wanted to do it. They all said no. Nobody wanted to do it. So I kind of found new players. And at some point in 2000, late 2000, I decided I wanted to release a single as a comeback. And I wanted to pick up where the All New Generation left off.
Right.
And if anybody that has the record knows, the All New Generation was our song about the various generations of music.
Right.
The first pre-chorus was Elvis Presley, Richard Jerry, Little Richard, Buddy Barry, the Beatles had a hard day's night.
Right.
The second verse was The Who, The Doors, Pink Floyd, Led Zeppelin, Rolling Stones, and Old Van Halen. And of course, we said Old Van Halen because at that point there had already been a new Van Halen, which was technically Van Hagar.
Right.
And then the third pre-chorus was Cooper, Kiss, the Oz and Motley, Poison, Axl, John Bon Jovi, Skid Row is the youth gone wild.
Yeah.
So I was thinking, I want to put out a song, a single, to relaunch Tuff into the ears of the crowd, the fans, the audience, the industry. And so I started writing this idea, but I realized that the scope of music, the landscape had changed. We had Marilyn Manson and Korn and Power Man 5000 and Kid Rock and Limp Bizkit. And so I said, well, let me take some new metal music and play around with it. And I kept going back to the Kid Rock song, which he sampled Metallica.
Right. Yeah.
And I was at some point decided to do this mashup and threw the Twisted Sister thing in there. And this is before mashups were a thing either.
Yeah,
it was like,
Yeah.
so but I wanted the message to be about the 80s. I wanted the message to be like, hey, Kurt Cobain is gone, but I'm back wearing leather pants and a backwards hat with guitar slung low where the down boys go. The night train's back, so on with the show.
Yep.
And started putting that together, spent a long time scripting those lyrics. And then I got a group of guys. We went in and recorded it. And shout, shout at the devil again. Shout, shout, never letting it end. Shout, shout, and then we released it. And I will say, the reaction was overwhelming.
Yeah.
We got added at P1 radio stations all over the country.
It was everywhere.
And for those that don't know, P1 is like the biggest level of, terrestrial radio stations. Atlanta, Kansas City, Detroit, Chicago. Getting tons of plays. There was a lot of stations, specialty shows that did a smash and trash.
Yep. We used to do
Or
that.
they did this band versus that band. Every time that we got used, compared on a smash and trash, it was always a smash.
Yeah.
Yep.
We went up against, new Limp Bizkit, Kid Rock, Megadeth, Power Man 5000, Marilyn Manson. We won every time. Yeah. And there was a younger generation or a newer generation that were grunge fans that were like, hey, this is kind of cool.
Yeah, exactly.
It's got a Metallica riff.
Yeah.
It's got the Twisted Sister thing. And then we did have the call-outs about Kiss. And listen, saying I want to see Tommy Lee back spinning those sticks is clearly a reference to like, dude, we don't want to see you DJing
Right.
with dreadlocks. Like, we wanted to see him spinning his sticks upside down.
And we don't want to see you go to college.
Yeah. So, not to be long-winded, but that song, I wanted a message to be released. And not just for us or me, but for all of the generation that liked that music. And at this point, Steel Panther, was bubbling under in Los Angeles. And, I started covering them on Metal Sludge, telling the rest of the world, listen, if you ever come to L.A., you have to go see this band. And by this point, tribute bands were starting to get a name for themselves. The Iron Maidens. The Atomic Punks, which also featured David Lee Ralph on vocals, where they were getting booked to play in Detroit or Chicago. Howard Stern was talking about the Atomic Punks on his show and said, I saw this Van Halen tribute, and I thought I was listening to the album. And that's how good they were. And then Ralph and Russ obviously were part of Metal Shop, which became Metal School and eventually Steel Panther, and now they've went global.
Right.
But that song was put together in here to say, Tuff's coming back, I want to make a statement, and this is the statement. Kurt Cobain is gone, but I'm back. And then, give Pearl Jam and Eddie a big fuck you.
Yeah, I was on a trip to L.A. with my wife last year, and we were pulling in to return our rental car to go to LAX, and that song came on the radio. And my wife is not really a big fan of these bands.
Right.
She's big into Pearl Jam. It got to that line, and she went, hey!
Well, and the thing is, it not only felt great that people were reacting to it, but even rock stars, my comrades, my brethren from the industry. Tracy Guns came up to me and said, dude, that might be the stupidest song ever or the most genius thing I've ever heard.
Yeah.
And honestly, I think it's genius.
Yeah, I do too.
Lon Friend from Rip Magazine. Yeah. He's like, Stevie, this is amazing. So many people said really good things. Of course, all the bands. The only complaints I had from other rock stars were people like Steve Brown from Trickster said, dude, you didn't name us.
Somebody feels left out.
Some people were like, you didn't name our band.
Where's Jet Boy?
Ron Keel, I think, said, you didn't put us in there. They're like, how come Johnny Crash is in there? I said, well, it rhymes with Slash. There's not a lot of bands that rhymed with Slash.
Rhyme scheme makes a difference.
But, putting it together, and I probably have lyric sheets somewhere in a file cabinet that I could probably unearth and dig through and go, oh, yeah, that's, Hanoi Rocks, Brittany Fox,
Right.
So putting it together was a cool thing, and the reaction was great. And now it's 20-some years later, still gets played.
Yep.
We play it live. And when I say it gets played, it's not just in America. Yeah. It's in England. It's in Sao Paulo, Brazil. Right. It's in Bangkok, Thailand. It's in Munich, Germany. It's in London, Belgium, Spain. And it's reverberated around the world.
I was so proud, man. So proud to be a Tuff fan, and they're letting me play it on the radio. And it's not just that people are calling the station going, we want to hear that hair band song.
Yeah.
It was, the phones were lighting up. The phones were lighting up everywhere it got played.
And then also they're calling and going, hey, play some old Motley Crue. Hey, play some Quiet Riot.
Yeah.
They're starting to ask for these bands again. And I was like, holy shit. Not only did this song change like the whole perception, because then all of a sudden it's like the Rock Never Stops tours start coming around again,
Glam
and people
Slam,
are
Metal
going
Jam.
to them.
Yeah.
And it was like that song got in people's heads and go, you know what? Why did we make fun of that? And why do we like this better? That was so much better, and that was so much more fun. And I just remember being so proud of, like, I was a Tuff fan all along,
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the thing is, Dee Schneider plays it. He's played it on the House of Hair, which is syndicated.
Yep.
And a lot of support from the stations where, like you said, it wasn't just like, hey, let's play this for Stevie. Nobody had to do me any favors.
Right.
They played it and they got reactions.
Right.
The people called and said, what was that song about Tommy Lee and Nikki Sixx and, Sebastian Bach is The Youth Gone Wild? Like, that song at some point has been played on a million, all different types of specialty shows that are all about the 80s.
Right.
Which
Yeah.
play old Bon Jovi, old Motley Crue, all those bands. We're the only new song. That's the only like modern day 2000 era song that gets played because
Right.
it's obviously a signature. Some of them use it as their intro song.
Yeah.
So they play that song as part of the intro or the
Yeah.
intro to the show to say tonight's Hairspray at 8. You
Yeah.
know, 80s at 8.
Well,
Hairspray replay.
And being here in Nashville, it blew up here on local radio, and I had friends and even younger people I knew. But it was like almost like everyone suddenly decided, oh, we're allowed to like this stuff again. And it was also it just everyone was like, God, it was such a fun time in music. And like events like this, we're celebrating a lot of that.
Right, yeah.
It's just it was happy times, and we weren't getting all dark and introspective and all that. It was just like you were going to concerts, you were having tailgate parties in the parking lot. That's fun stuff to do. And I'm not a country music fan, but I do have to give them credit. The majority of country music songs are about enjoying your life.
Right.
So they've kind of taken a cue from your generation of bands to where you're making memories, and I think that's very important. It's a rallying cry, and it reminded all of us of, man, this was such a fun time to be alive.
Yeah.
And that's why that stuff still thrives
well,
today.
and at some point, even though it was shunned by the masses at some point in the 90s, there was periods when it did turn around. I remember being at a club in Los Angeles, and I'm standing there, and some guy walks up to me and he goes, hey, are you Stevie Rachelle from Tuff? And I was like, yeah. He's like, somebody wants to talk to you. I was like, okay. So he walks me over to this table, and I didn't know who the guy was, but he's like, hey, my name is Josie from Saliva.
Saliva, yeah. Joseph
Who had
Scott.
had a big record at that point.
Yeah.
He's like, dude, I'm a huge fan. I used to see your band. He was obviously a generation younger than us, not too much,
Right.
but he's younger. And he went out of his way to say, dude, I love your band. You're awesome. And that made me feel good.
Right.
Tom Morello from Rage Against the Machine came up to me once at the Rainbow. Said really nice things to me.
Wow.
That's
I've heard Wednesday 13 say good things.
Wednesday, go up as a fan. Like, I didn't know this. Many years later, he's in the Murder Dolls, and he contacts me online. He goes, hey, when I was like 15, I used to come see your band, but I wasn't old enough to get into the show, so me and my girlfriend had my girlfriend's grandma drive us, and he was in the parking lot, and our tour bus pulled in, and then he said, you got off the bus, you were so nice to me, and now he's in the Murder Dolls.
Right,
Opening up for Marilyn Manson, playing
Right.
festivals. And then he was like, yeah, and your bass player was a total dick. He's like, but you were the coolest, Nice. So, hearing that, hearing other guys from modern bands. I remember I was listening to a radio show in Los Angeles, and they were interviewing Jacoby from Papa Roach.
Okay, yeah.
Obviously, a more modern kind of music
Yeah.
at that point. And he's like, the DJ's like, yeah, so, what was your, like, what'd you grow up like? What were your first concerts? And Jacoby was like, oh, dude, I went to Poison and Warrant, and I went to Slaughter. And the DJ's like, oh, you're joking around, right? He's like, no. I went to Warrant and Slaughter and Poison. He's like, well, you don't really like those bands, do you? Like, the DJ's trying to still throw fire on it.
Yeah.
And Jacoby's like, no, dude.
Yeah.
Those were, like, the best fucking concerts of my life.
Yeah. Great concert.
And at some point, I was like, dude, fucking A. That's right on you for sticking up for it. Because it was, the element of the DJ going, no, those bands suck, right? And he's like, no, dude. That was my youth.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So we're all happy kumbaya about this. But
So basically, everything you see here, Rockin' Pod, without Stevie Rachelle, it don't happen.
Let's not go that far.
Yeah. Well, it's like we're all kumbaya about this. But So in 1998, a website pops up called Metal Sludge, and all the names of the writers are like Janie Bon Neal and all these Donna Anderson, and like you could tell they're all
Tammy Sex Slaughter.
Yeah, Tammy Sex Slaughter. They're all made up names. But the funniest thing is, and it really took the internet by storm. People are like, who the hell is writing this stuff? But I always had a feeling from the get-go that I was like, a lot of this is tongue-in-cheek, and a lot of this has to be coming from people on the inside of the whole industry.
Right.
I didn't know it was you. It was years before you kind of made your announcement that it was you.
6 years.
Yeah, 6 years. But I always had a vibe that I was like, there's got to be rock stars that are in on this stuff. And tell us about how in on it, you had several guys from known guys from bands that were contributing to these articles, right?
They were contributing, but they also didn't know who I was.
Oh, they didn't
Or
know.
my partner, no.
Wow,
but
I didn't know that.
When we started writing articles or people were like, hey, we'd contact somebody and say, we want to do an interview with you.
Yeah.
Tracy Guns. And of course, this is when it was two different LA Guns. So everything that we asked Tracy would be about Phil or Steve. And then when we interviewed
Vice
Phil,
versa.
we'd ask about Tracy and whoever his band was. But at some point, there was certain guys that would like write back and be really funny or really concise with their answers and organized. And so at some point, we were like, hey, do you want to write something for us?
Yeah.
Like Ricky Rocket.
Mm-hmm.
Ricky Rocket did some interviews. He was one of the first big stars that did it. And then what happened is we reached out to him and said, would you like to do a column?
All right.
And we came up with the idea for him to do Dr. Rocket.
Yeah.
And then people would write in, girl, I have a boyfriend and I really like him, but he's really small and I can't have an orgasm. How can you help, And of course, sometimes we would script the question
Sure.
to be a live one. And then Ricky would like, Dear Julie, first of all, dump your boyfriend. So at some point, Ricky was really supportive of the site
Right.
and he would contribute, but he didn't know who we were.
Oh, okay.
Jizzy at some point had written some stuff. Scott Ian of Anthrax
Yeah.
was doing tour diaries. But none of them, for the most part, knew who we were.
Okay.
But they just knew that this was obviously, the site was blowing up.
Right.
It was an avenue for them to get exposure,
Sure.
and I think some of the fans realized that we started selling merchandise, shirts, baby dolls, tank
Yeah.
tops. And then if they wear that to the show,
Yeah.
a lot of times, literally somebody like Ricky Rocket would be on the stage and go,
Yeah.
tell his roadie, go give that dude a
Yeah.
pass. He's
Just-
a sludgeaholic.
Just don't wear it to a Sebastian Bach concert.
Yeah.
And Sebastian was a big supporter in the early days until you guys wrote about him, right?
Well, he was a fan. We've published the initial emails. He was like, you guys have big balls. I love your site.
Right.
And then there was some incident that happened in, I believe, Toronto. And he was doing a show, and he had a limousine that was taking him to the show. But the limousine broke down, like right outside the venue, like a few blocks away. And Sebastian and whoever he was with had to walk through the snow in his big white shoes he wears. And somebody saw it. And I think they got a picture, and then they said, yeah, we saw Sebastian stomping through the snow like the abominable snowman, and he was fucking mad. His limousine broke down. And so we wrote something about it. It was very surface.
You're right.
Nothing too... But he lost his mind.
Yeah.
He was very offended, and from then on, he thought we were out to get him, which we weren't.
Right.
But the fact that he overreacted so much,
Yeah.
we were like, okay, let's pour a little bit more gasoline on
Let's
that.
dig in on Sebastian.
And we also got that because it was like Howard Stern used to have, there was somebody had a feud with. It was a famous celebrity who wouldn't do his show. And then because the guy wouldn't do it, Stern would send Stuttering John to every event this guy was at, and Stuttering John would be wearing the mustaches and the wigs and the
Right.
fake glasses, and he'd ask him some normal question, then the guy would answer, and then he'd start throwing these
The weird
more
ones.
loaded questions, and then, Stern started sending the whack pack after him.
Right.
And that's kind of what we did with Sludge.
Yeah.
We'd go to the Sebastian Bach show and wear a Metal Sludge shirt and wave at him from the front row, and then
Right.
he'd be furious at some guy he didn't even know just because the guy had our shirt on.
And it became a bounty situation where you were like even offering money for people to get
$500
to get a photo wearing a Sludge shirt with Sebastian.
Wow.
Yeah. So, and there was people that would show up and they'd have a shirt on under a zip jacket and trying to get in line to get a photo with him, but nobody ever got the bounty.
I don't
but
think
we were
anyone
going to
ever
pay
did it. Yeah.
$500 if you can get a picture of yourself with him wearing our
So
suit.
funny. But I loved all the stuff on there, like the Super Balls awards and the Beyond a Fucking Bitch awards, but it was just wild. I mean, and then of course the famous penis chart, the groupie section, and but I don't know. It's just, but see, it was This is 1998, so the internet is absolutely the Wild West,
And it's at an infant stage. It's
Yeah.
brand new.
Yeah.
There was no social media. There was no Twitter, no Facebook, no MySpace, no YouTube, no Instagram. There was
Yeah.
none of that. It was
Yeah.
not there. And it's not like we had a crystal ball.
All right.
Or I thought, well, hey, this is going to be really big in 10 years, so let's do this now. It was just initially a place where let's make this community, this message board, this chat room, where people could come in and go, hey, I like Nitro. I like Kick Tracy,
Right.
King of the Hill, Pariah.
Right.
Rhino Bucket, these more obscure bands, because all Metal Edge would give you, or Spin Magazine, would be the Slaughter, Warrant, Winger Tour,
Right.
or White Snake, or Motley, or Poison, and we wanted to give the fans just the obscure stuff, like where is
Yeah.
the singer from Kick Tracy for the last 15 years?
Yeah.
We got an interview with him. He works at a print shop. He's got a kid. He's
Yeah.
doing this. He's doing that. So we started digging in, and we got, the singer from Sleazebees and all those obscure bands.
Yeah.
And at some point, people turn to that because they're like, we already know where Bret Michaels is. He's
Yeah.
on that TV show.
Right.
But yeah, Metal Sludge is where you could go to discuss the greatness of Warrant's Dog Eat Dog, Winger's Pull,
Right.
Motley 94. Those are like the trinity of albums that are underrated.
Right.
But I think he said we got 5 minutes left. If we want to do some question,
All good.
Anybody got any questions? Or are we doing good?
raise your hand if you have a question. Otherwise, we'll just keep
They're
going.
completely blown away. This is amazing. No, I love that too because sludge was another thing, kind of like it predated the American Hair Band because when I discovered sludge, it was like, oh, there's a place where they're still talking about the bands I like. And like say like Pariah. Pariah was an amazing band, and they had an amazing album, but it was only one album.
Yeah.
And then things went south for them. But where else were you going to
Tom
hear anything
Zutaut right
about
there
that band?
worked on that album.
Yeah, right? Amazing. I love that album. But then, Sludge was a place where a guy like me could still feel like the bands I love are getting attention. Maybe not always good attention, but they're getting attention.
Well, then something else that was happening, and of course, again, none of us knew how this would work, how the internet would unfold.
Right.
But we start this forum, and somebody's on there talking about this band or that band, and they're in Denver. And then somebody else that's chiming in is from Phoenix.
Right.
This guy's from New Jersey,
Right.
Florida, Austin, Denmark, Brazil, England,
Yeah,
Munich.
yeah.
Suddenly we have a whole global community of people that are like, hey, I really like this album. Oh, did you know it's been reissued by Rock Candy?
Yeah,
Oh, did you
yeah.
know they're going on tour, they've reunited. So not everybody would know about it. And so this internet thing, people started sharing that information
Right.
through our chat forums, our message boards. And of course, we were getting fed information as well. A lot of times our information wasn't all coming from me or a couple of the insiders. Somebody, as cell phones became more popular and more people had the internet, somebody would go to a show and say, Vince Neil just fell off the stage.
Right, yeah.
And John Corabi's singing Livewire right now in place of him, with his solo band. And we're like, are you kidding me? Really? And then they just send a photo and Vince, when he fell off the stage a couple years ago and broke his ribs.
Yeah.
We had
was here
that
in
story
Tennessee.
very early.
Yeah.
Right, yeah.
We had stories very early that were not always good stories.
Right.
We were one of the first sites to publish something that there had been a tragic fire in Rhode Island. I remember being on the internet, on the forums, and people were talking about something that happened at the Damage Plan show in El Rosa Villa.
I remember that.
In Columbus.
Yeah.
And they said there's been a shooting. There was people that said, Dimebag is going to the hospital. He might have died. And at some point, I realized it wasn't a hoax because there was people talking about, I'm in the parking lot by the Red Roof Inn right now. I see ambulances everywhere.
Oh.
And I played there, and I knew that there was a hotel, a
Right.
Red Roof right there. They were telling things that were geographically impossible for
yeah.
anybody to know unless they were actually there.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
And I'm like, nobody's going out of their way to make all this up. So at some point, you know, we also were getting fed information about situations that, you know, were good and not always good, but it was news nonetheless. And at some point, you know, we were there to report it.
It's amazing how far we've come.
It is.
Yeah.
And it's also the place to go to hear Donnie V set the facts straight.
Right?
All right.
Yeah.
All right, I think we're down. I think we've used our time. So you want to wrap things up?
All right. Once again, we're the Decibel Geek Podcast. We're huge fans of Tuff. We're huge fans of Stevie Rachelle. And we're huge fans of everybody that came out here to ROCKNPOD. Thank you guys so much for joining us for this.
Thank you.
You're awesome.
Thank you for coming out. Thank you for supporting. I do have a booth over there with the big Tuff logo if you want to come and say hi. I got swag, vinyl, CDs.
I'm getting my Cheesehead autograph.